No, so I mean, I know that we're gonna steamroll on. I mean, we're at the hour mark now. We're gonna steamroll on right to Dr. Weldon, who's in the background. I thought that it's a good mix. We had it starting off with the third sector, another follow up from our nurses, and now we've got the individual who's leading the government's testing lab here in Bermuda as it relates to COVID-19 in Dr. Carika Weldon. So I think without further ado, we'll introduce her, welcome her. I know that she's backstage. So Dr. Weldon should be joining us on the screen shortly. Dr. Weldon, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Good to see you, Ryan and Erin. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, you're the woman of the hour, I would say, Dr. Weldon, the star of the current show. We've heard a lot about you over the past couple of weeks and your assistance in Bermuda government's response to this current pandemic. So thank you. We're sure you're very busy for sharing your time with us, and we're excited to have you on today's series as our final guest.
Thank you. I was actually enjoying watching from backstage just now, so I'm looking forward to what we might get into, actually. But I want to just say as well, my name has been said a lot, but I want to make sure that today I put the actual due respect to those who are actually doing the work as well. So I have a long list later, so make sure I get that in before I finish.
Sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Weldon, can you tell us a bit? I know that we've seen your name in the papers. We've seen you at a press conference. But for those who haven't and those who are tuned in right now, can you tell us a little bit about what your role is right now, what you're doing up there at the Southside Lab?
Okay, so I have 3 roles at the moment. The main one is to actually lead the second testing lab that was established in Bermuda, which is the Bermuda Government Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory, also known as MDL. Then I am also the science advisor to the government. And so anything that has to do with the scientific background to how the testing works, where the science community is in terms of testing, all of that type of remit is mine. And then also I am actually in charge of the swabbing site at Southside and had to kind of get that up and running, working alongside Dr. Amne Ossaran, which has been very awesome, and Mr. Stephen Tucker, who is the logistics coordinator. Dr. Amne Ossaran is the clinical coordinator or medical officer there. So that's the 3 kind of roles I have. And obviously collecting the samples is very integral into doing the testing. And so those 2 things kind of go hand in hand. So that's what I do.
Well, how do you balance the 3? I mean, it sounds like you just listed 3 full-time jobs there, Dr. Weldon. Have you had a science advisor to the government before? Are you the first, or how does all of this work together in 24 hours in a day?
Right. So as far as I know, there has never been a science advisor to the government. I think that COVID-19 has shown that shown Bermuda that we need science more, and being a scientist and being an advocate for science, I was very pleased to be able to fill that role. So yeah, I think I'm the first one. That is not as straining, I would say. I do have meetings weekly. We have an advisory panel, and I do have to just communicate with the government very often, the cabinet. But more so, the burden is actually the testing and the swabbing site, because we run that multiple days a week. I am also not just directing the lab, but I am on the bench as well. So this week, for the last couple of days, I've been doing the night shift, actually. So all the samples that come in, I would then do at the end of the day. And my great lab assistants, we are there till probably like 1 to 2 in the morning, making sure we get them done. Wow. So it is a lot. Luckily today, I do not have to go into the lab. The only thing I have to do is to have a lovely chat with you gentlemen. I'm answering emails and I'm answering the lab phone, which is sponsored by Digicel, by the way, our mobile phone. But other than that, I'm not going into the lab. So today is a good day.
Well, I hope you're getting some sleep, Dr. Weldon. I mean, I don't know how much time you have with us today, but I know Erin and I were excited to speak to you, and we have quite a few questions, but it definitely sounds like you have a lot on your plate, so we're grateful for you for taking up the time. And as you can see, we're seeing a lot of comments rolling in, a lot of people sending their thank yous and appreciation.
Well, I'm glad to be of use, and I think one of the defining moments for me has been that, the subject I went to study, which at the time wasn't very clear how I could help Bermuda. And I was asked a lot, okay, well, how is a biochemistry degree supposed to help Bermuda? And I was like, I don't know, but it's what I enjoy. Obviously, when I went to school, some people may not know this, but I actually intended to go away to become a medical doctor. My plan was to apply when I was here at high school, but I didn't get in. But my whole career was over after that. So I got rejected from medical school. Yep. 4 of them in the UK. And then I did get into other schools in the US and Canada, but I wanted to really go to the UK. So I went to do medical biochemistry as a backup not a backup, more like a plan B to then get into medicine, but then fell in love with the research side. And so that's where I've stayed. But it's for me surreal to see what I went to study is able to directly help the country. And I think that's something I've really taken on. And a lot of young people doing science have said, thank you, thank you for blazing the trail. So I'm just humbled.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Weldon, I think you've had a lot of interviews in the past and you've been in the press. And I think, we've sort of seen a lot about what you're actually doing. So I was hoping, Aaron, unless you think otherwise, I was hoping to focus this interview a lot on your own personal experience and sort of how you've dealt with this current situation, because a lot of the statistical stuff is already out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But while you did mention your biochemistry degree, and before we get into the meat of the conversation, do take a moment, just talk to us briefly. How has your biochemistry degree been applied? Because I know we see you and we say Dr. Weldon, she's from Oxford, she's working down there at the testing site, but I want you to just connect that with sort of what you went to study and what you're doing currently. You did mention briefly, you're the science advisor to the premier, you're running the testing site, and you're also doing some of the different shifts with the swabbing. But can you be a bit more specific into how your degree and your particular qualifications apply to the role that you're currently occupying?
Yeah, so this is probably where I'll talk my head off. I do enjoy talking, by the way.
I will stop you if it's too long.
Okay. So I went to do medical biochemistry as my undergraduate. And what that means is biochemistry is all the chemical reactions that happen in human life. And so in studying that, I was more focused on medical, so those in humans. In that degree is when I actually first learned about PCR. So I think everyone has heard PCR a lot in the last couple months, because that's the test that we do. That was when I first learned about it. And that's when I first did it. We actually had to do that in our practicals in undergraduate. And then going forward, I went to do my degree, my PhD at the same place, and did it in biochemistry. And again, there is when I would say mostly what I've applied from my PhD. I know people keep calling me doctor. Really, all that happened was I went and did experiments for 3 years, and then I wrote it up. And
all you did was experiment for 3 years and then I wrote it up.
And that's literally what happens with a PhD. You do it,
but you said it like that's nothing. Don't downplay.
I know. But I really want to put it into perspective, because a lot of people, obviously I worked hard for it, but it's not unattainable by everyone else.
Yeah, it was only 3 years of experiments that you did. And how many words was the paper?
40,000. But it's a lot to say. It's 3 years. It's a lot to write about.
Right.
So
do you recall doing any 40,000 word essay in law school?
Aaron, the most I did was 12,000, and that's something that people do on a regular. So this all I did was 3 experiments over 3 years and 48,000 words. Come on, doctor.
What I'm trying to convey is that it's not something that isn't attainable by others. I've had a passion. There was a project that I really loved, and I had a supervisor, and we would work our way through it. Okay, we did this experiment, we got this result. Let's go this way and pursue this experiment. And it just kept going like that. And you do that for 3 years, and then you have to obviously put it all together and write it up and defend it in a Bible, which is like a 3-hour interview. But I would say during that time, really what I've gathered and used now is 2 skills, 2 of them. Number 1, you learn that it's a long haul deal. You're not there. It's not a quick, do an experiment, that's it. You have to keep going, and you have to think about it long term. And in this pandemic, you've heard it a lot of the time, it's not a sprint, right? It's a race. And I think I've really had to apply that here. And the other thing is actually handling a lot of samples at once. Now, I've never, prior to this, handled clinical samples, and I'll make that clear. I was never on the clinical side. I was doing the basic science. But the exact same principle of me handling during my PhD, maybe 190 samples at once for my experiment, now I'm doing that, but it's 190 patient samples for testing. So it's been a direct kind of like transfer of skills from my PhD to what I'm doing now. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. We just wanted to get an understanding of sort of how your current education has been applied and why, for example, there are thousands of people in the country that are doing it. So I know that you were trying to remain humble by talking about what you had to do to get your doctorates, but certainly if there were plenty of people who could do what you did, then you wouldn't necessarily be, the person that we're looking to for answers and for guidance. So I think it's important to state that as well. Aaron, did you have any particular questions about her current work or education before we move on to sort of her personal experiences?
Well, yes, and I think it ties into the humility that we can see coming through the screen and that all our listeners can hear and see, is that Dr. Weldon, you are responsible you're leading the task of the science. You're the science advisor for the government. You're leading the Southside lab there. We, particularly myself, during questioning during the Bird News interviews, or not interviews, the press conferences, had asked some rather hard-hitting questions with respect to another lab. You mentioned that you were the second of two labs. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the question was asked of the government how much another lab was being paid, and that was a figure of $91,000 a month. And I know that, for instance, you run a charitable foundation, the Bermuda Principles Foundation. And so I wondered, and I don't know what your response is going to be, but I wondered, is it similar? Are you being paid something similar to that? Or what is your arrangement for compensation for your effort? You mentioned 3 tasks, 3 heads that you were responsible for on a day-to-day basis. We don't even know how you have the time to be here with us today. But my question to you is, are you being paid for the work that you're giving the government?
The short answer is no. So I am the science advisor, but I am on a peppercorn contract, so I don't get any compensation. It was $1 officially, but that's the arrangement for that. And then for the testing, I personally, when I do the test, it costs the government nothing. The only cost that I have incurred for the government is to get me to Bermuda, which I came on the airbridge flight, so that was not too much. And then also my accommodation, because I didn't want to stay with my family and put them at risk. And gas for the car that I need. But other than that, hasn't been any other expenses. And then for the third, I guess, job of managing the swabbing site, no, I have come to realize that this is my time to give back. That's how I see it. I was awarded 2 scholarships actually during my studies. The undergraduate Sir Henry Tucker Scholarship from Bank of Bermuda Foundation, and then the Sir Arthur Dudley Sperling Butterfield Postgraduate Scholarship. And I wouldn't be Dr. Weldon if it wasn't for that. And so for me to be Dr. Weldon, fantastic, but really the proof is in the pudding of me being able to give back. And I don't think personally I would feel okay knowing my fellow Bermudians are suffering. I am a professional, yes, my services are worth something, but I just feel personally more, I feel better knowing that I'm actually giving back to the country in the exact way that I was trained in a global pandemic. And for me, that's fine. I sleep very well at night.
I think that's very noble, but how are you getting by? So for example, Dr. Weldon, if this continues, let's say for months now, I mean, I'm sure when you came back, you were very eager to apply your expertise and knowledge, but this may very well turn into a full-time role. How are you getting by? Do you have other jobs, or are you being sponsored? I mean, I understand your accommodation is taken care of, but how long do you see yourself keeping this up if this situation continues?
So what I will point out is that me being here, I had to be approved from my job in the University of Oxford to come here to kind of be on approved leave. My job at the moment is involved in the COVID-19 response in England. Everyone in the team, so I work in a sequencing lab, and so they are actually a part of the UK consortium that is doing the genomic sequencing of the virus. And so they are already in pandemic response. And my boss said, you know what, Carika, it's better you go home to Bermuda, because he actually came for one of the conferences last year. Go home and help your country. That's fine. And so I still get paid my Oxford salary. So I'm not making more, I'm not making less. I'm still able to pay my rent in the UK while I'm here. But for me, that's enough. I'm not here to do more than just to give back. You know, I think that's the Bermudian way. We want to help each other. And I think this is the crucial time that for me, I want to do that. And that's what I've chosen.
So I guess if you look at it one way, it's almost like you're on secondment. You still have a full-time job
exactly.
And you've come back to help out for the time being. Okay, I can understand that.
So I'm not like got a whole bunch of bills in the UK that when I get back, I'm scratching my hair like, oh my God. No, that's not the case. But obviously I know that my skill set here in Bermuda, I would get paid a lot more for what I do, but that's not really where my mindset is right now. I just want to be able to help because people are dying. So far out of sadly the 9 deaths in Bermuda, I have been close to 2 of them, and I've lost my great aunt who was actually in Panama the day after I arrived. She was in Panama with her husband. I think you've seen them in the media quite a lot, well, the husband. So it's directly affected me. And for me, I couldn't really put a number on that. I would rather just give back and try to stop anyone else from feeling the loss of a family member.
Now, Dr. Weldon, I want to take this up a notch, and I hope you're not offended, but I do think that it's important that we don't breeze over this, right? Because, I mean, we're seeing a lot of Bermudians comment right now where they're saying, thank you, you're so humble, and thank you for your selflessness. And I think that's all fine, right? But I think we have to contrast that and juxtapose that with some of the recent happenings that have occurred since you've arrived on island. So you told us today, for example, that you're doing this volunteer, right? You're not getting paid. You're wearing 3 hats. You're using your doctorate's degree to advise the premier. You're running a testing site, and you're on the ground as a soldier, you know, putting your boots on the ground, swabbing yourself, right? And you're doing all of this for free, voluntarily.
I'm not swabbing. Just want to get. I'm not doing the swabbing. I'm just making sure that all happens right. But
you're coordinating it.
Doing the testing in the lab, yeah.
Okay.
You might be causing other happenings, Ryan.
yeah. Before we hear any more allegations, thank you for that clarification. But my point is, Doc, you're wearing 3 different hats. You've traveled all the way over here. You did 2 weeks in quarantine. You've left your job temporarily. You're here volunteering day after day. You just said you're working the night shift. And a lot of Bermudians, the response so far in the general public and on social media has been very positive. We're seeing a lot of thank yous, and we're so grateful. And look at this awesome young Black Bermudian woman. And I think that's all fine and dandy, right? But the thing that concerns me, and I'm tying it into the fact that you're volunteering, is sort of the way that we view or use the expertise of our young Bermudians. And I say this because it probably wouldn't be as much of an issue if you only received positive feedback and support. You know, here's a young Black Bermudian woman who's come back, she's applying her degree to come back and help the community. That's fine. People do that all the time, right? But over the past few weeks, Aaron and I have observed certain happenings and certain tensions that have been inflamed throughout the community. You've been questioned for your credentials, for example. People have challenged your experience and your qualifications. There have been allegations made that people didn't want to work with you, for example, or people were having issues with giving you the tools that you needed to work. And I'm wondering how we tie that in with the fact that you're volunteering. So do you feel, for example, that there's a risk in sort of embracing this humility and nobleness and nobility and selflessness? Is there a risk that perhaps people may take that for granted and sort of not value you for the expertise that you're contributing?
I think that is a risk, but it's a risk I've been willing to take. I do know that when you, okay, to just address what you said, yes, there has been challenges, and I think a lot of them, or not all of them, some of them have been public. I mean, I think I just came out of quarantine, and the question was asked about me doing illegal testing. And I was watching the funny thing is I was watching the press conference and did not see my name coming at the end of that sentence. I was like, what? And so it was just like, well, how can that be? And, you know, many times the Ministry of Health have had to come out and refute certain things that have been said, because otherwise left would have defamed my character and my integrity. And that's been challenging, and I won't pretend like that hasn't affected me. There have been days when I have just been like, why on earth did I come back? It has made me question, because at the time it's overwhelming. But ultimately, I would rather, in this instance, go through those days where I'm like, this is hard, than to be back in England, where I was actually, in fact. And actually, when it started, I was in Nigeria. And I think you know that, Ryan. I was in Nigeria when it all kind of kicked off, and I was like, I could probably get stuck here, right? That was my thought. I was like, I wouldn't mind being here, because, like, you know, at the time they didn't have any cases. But then I thought, you know what, I would rather go back home and help than to look from afar and be like, oh, I wish I could have helped. So that's where I stand on it. I mean, I have had challenges, and there have been some really concerning.
Can you speak to some of those challenges? I mean, I know you can't probably disclose everything that's happening because you're working under the government right now. But
Yeah.
to what extent can you advise? Fill us in. What has been your experience since you've come back? We've seen the public support, but beyond that, what's going on under the covers or beneath the
scene? I can't share what's happening under the covers completely, but what I can say is that because I think, but as you touched on it, the young aspect. I mean, I read 30 last week, getting used to saying that. And I think that in Bermuda, we have to respect experience rather than age. And although I am 30, I have been in the field of RNA for 10 years. And at the moment, that's quite a lot, right? I have gone to conferences all over the world and spoken, and I know many scientists and researchers, mainly because of the conference that I do. And the field of RNA, which is what the testing is, because you have to convert the RNA virus into DNA and then make more copies. That process is something I have done for a while and actually have published on. So I'm a published scientist, and I think that needs to be looked at more. And for me, I think the shift has come because in the science community, I wouldn't have gone through this. In the science community, you can have a professor, you can have a Nobel Prize winner who respects an undergraduate because of the science. And that's how it is. You don't have to explain yourself. The work speaks for itself. And that's why I said that when I was asked at the press conference, because as a scientist, that's what I'm used to. When you go to a conference, you don't show up and say, oh, I'm the best scientist there is. Oh my God. You show up, you give a talk on your research, and that's where the respect comes from what
and you're saying that didn't align with your experience when you landed in Bermuda?
It didn't align. And I think it might be a reason because Bermuda, we're not very much deep into science. And that's why, for example, as far as I know, the first science advisor. We haven't really had a focus on that, which is. But
is that the reason? Because I'm going to push you here because I really want to understand, in your opinion, what is the why? Why is it? I mean, as far as I see, when I see your credentials and I see the work that you've already been doing, you run your own foundation, the Bermuda Principles Foundation. You've been working at Oxford. You have a doctorate's degree. I mean, as far as I could see, if you had stayed somewhere, for example, Nigeria, let's say, or in the UK, I'm pretty sure that the experts over there would have welcomed you and sort of called you in and maybe even kidnapped you so that you could apply your research and your expertise, right? But the sentiments that I'm getting from you is that when you came home to Bermuda, that was not necessarily your experience. And it seems like, it would be more of an issue if you were maybe getting paid, but you came back to volunteer. And it seems like in some ways you still had to fight to put your foot in the door and assist. Now, correct me if that's not true, but that's the general sentiment that I'm getting. And I really want to understand why. I mean, you've put together the suggestion that maybe it's a science thing, but I would put to you, I mean, Aaron and I are law students. I would put to you that if there was some giant constitutional matter and they needed someone in a new area of research, that perhaps other young Bermudians might have this same issue if it were not science related. And go ahead, Aaron. I'm just trying to get some discussion on what do you think sort of is the role of young Bermudians in all of this, and how do you tie into it as being reflected by your example? Go ahead, Aaron.
To Dr. Weldon's credit, I don't think that that's a question necessarily that I think she's going to find out the reality that Bermuda has, right? But that's not a question really for her per se. I think that it's one of those things that's a straightforward business thing, right? I started off this aspect of the conversation by saying that my question was with respect to another lab and the substantial amounts that lab was being paid. Now, let's say, for example, Ryan, let's just attribute it to law. Say that you're you just first year called to the bar, right? And you say to the government during a constitutional crisis, I want to offer my services for free. And you have an established, confirmed law firm who has reputable experience, if you will, that's charging a six-figure sum. And then you say, well, I want to offer my services for free. It is business to criticize you. It has absolutely nothing to do with Dr. Weldon's credentials. It has nothing to do with her ability. And I think that it's a shame. And I think that those realities are highlighted in a small place like Bermuda. When in reality, we should be joining together. But that's not really something for Dr. Weldon. I think that that's something for us as a community to look beyond and say, is this really what we're prepared to do to those individuals who go overseas, get qualified, get experience, and come back to lend themselves? Because When Dr. Weldon says, well, look, I've been given 2 scholarships. There's no way that I'm going to charge my country during a national pandemic. That speaks about Dr. Weldon's her credibility, her integrity, her humility, and what she actually feels. Now, that's not a criticism for somebody who wants to take remuneration for the services that they provide, but it does speak to Dr. Weldon's recognizing that, hey, look, this is something that I stand for. This is something that I believe in. And I think the larger thing that we have to look at as a community is how do we actually deal with situations like this? How are we assessing it? Because Dr. Weldon could have, if she didn't have the mental fortitude and the resilience to say, I'm going to put that to the aside, because there are some days where, Ryan, you and I will get criticism, and it's like, well, why am I doing this? She could have easily said, well, you know what? I'm not being paid. I'm not under a contract per se. So you know what? I didn't want to do this, but go ahead and continue the other arrangement that you had. And that's the risk that we as the populace face when we're criticizing people, not understanding that these professionals are still individuals. So the reality of it is...
No, I take that point, Aaron. And I mean, I didn't want to put all of that pressure on Dr. Weldon to answer in particular in relation to her own personal circumstances. But the reason that I did raise it, Aaron, is because I'm thinking, and I don't want to hop on the negative here, but what I'm seeing here is a connection when it comes to young Bermudians, right? We've been dealing as a country with what we've called and dubbed the brain drain for decades now, where we have young Bermudians, for example, Aaron, that go overseas or maybe in Bermuda, they get qualified, they go elsewhere and they take their expertise. And some of them have said and reported that they feel more appreciated or they feel more comfortable outside of their own country. And so, Dr. Weldon, I didn't want to put all of that pressure on you to answer this question. I'm sure you don't know the full, reasons behind why the community operates the way that it does in certain respects. But I did think that there was a wider question here of the value that we place on some of our young people and young educated Bermudians.
Yeah, I if I could jump in as well, I think it is a question for us as a community. And I think what I've been told, and this actually was told to me by someone else who had come to my conference, I want to say 2 years ago in 2018, and they saw everything happening. And she said to me, she said, you need to, and you might disagree with this, but I think it was a valid point. She said, you need to stop letting them call you young. So I was like, what do you mean? I am young. I'm not 30 yet. And she said, okay, you are young, as it were. But in this context, young, they're tagging to inexperience. And so the more we say young, I mean, yes, I would say I'm not old. No, I am not as old as I'm not in my 50s or 60s. I'm not saying that's old, but I am younger. But, the connotation of, oh yeah, look at this young girl. Like, it's almost like, oh yeah, she's trying her best. And I think that's maybe a part of the problem is that we have to tag the word young to someone that potentially has more experience than others. And so using that word young, I think, is actually a two-edged sword sometimes.
I understand. So you're saying that when you say you are a young Bermudian, some people interpret that and think an inexperienced Bermudian. Right. I don't think that's a reason not to use the word young, because how do you remove the stigma of being young with, if you're not proclaiming it? The fact of the matter, Doc, is last week this time on Tuesday, you went 30 years old. You are a young Bermudian. So if we're removing the word young, then are we now reducing the value that young Bermudians are making as a whole? Shouldn't it be better for us to learn to hear the word young Bermudian and not associate that with a lack of knowledge or a lack of expertise, but instead embrace that and say, that's an empowering thing. Young people are making valid contributions. So that's up to you whether you want to call yourself young or old.
I'm not saying not to call me young, but I just think that is what needs to happen is that link between the word young and inexperience needs to be broken.
Completely agree. And you have to think also about the example that you set, right? There are, whether you identify as young or not, there are other young Bermudians who are genuinely...
I am young, by the way.
Okay, good. We accept that. There are other Bermudians out there, right, who are thinking about applying to school or going to college and going through their studies, who I'm sure are looking up to you and saying, this is somebody that I can identify with. She teaches me at Bermuda Principles, or she came to my school the other day. And so I think it's important for us to not eradicate the word young, but really for us as a community to embrace that and say, my age does not equal my experience or the validity of the contributions that I'm making. And quite the opposite, I would say, is I think it's even more telling that, you know, we very well could have had a 70-year-old doctor come back from Oxford with a degree and come and charge for their services and set up a fancy contract and lab. And yet it wasn't an older person that did it. It was you, a young Bermudian. And so, you know, you have certain quotes that the youth shall lead the way. And I definitely think that this is a very poetic example of that, where we have you, Dr. Weldon, who's come back and made a contribution to our island as a young Bermudian.
And I think just to compound that, Dr. Weldon, you deserve an enormous amount of credit, and I know that you're getting that credit and that respect from members of the community for the stance that you have taken. Because sometimes, whether it's right or wrong, that we have entrenched views in the community as it relates to young people and their experience and the like, we have to acknowledge that that's a fact. We've got to break that cycle. And part of breaking that cycle, Dr. Weldon, even though personally wouldn't be my stance, is the stance that you've taken to say, you know what, this could potentially be a red herring. This could potentially be an issue if I get compensated. You know what, let me put that to the side. I actually don't care to be. Am I qualified enough to be? Yes. But I'm going to break into this entrenched cycle and this entrenched mindset by doing the job. You know, you can never criticize me about the payment that I'm receiving, because I'm not receiving payment. I'm going to do the job. And that's how you'll be judged. That's the credit and the recognition. That's the basis of the recognition and the credit that you get, is that you have completed and you are completing the job to the standard that anybody else who will be collecting a six-figure sum has done. And that is the only test. But speaking of testing, can you just tell us a bit more about the process of that testing that you guys are doing down there at the Southside Lab? What does it involve?
So I'm really happy. Actually, today is the 1 month anniversary of the Molecular Diagnostic Laboratory. So it was good timing. We started on April 19th with doing testing, and our first batch was actually the quarantine group, which I was in. So I was part of the first group that was tested in the lab. I do not do the testing myself only. There are some other staff members who have, for this time period, asked to remain nameless. And I think that's awesome, because we're all kind of on the same page as a team. We just want to get the work done. They want to be shown later. But what we do is we have two different types of tests. We have the PCR test, which actually detects if you have the virus currently in your system. And that requires the swab that goes deep in your nose. It's not nice. I'm not going to lie. It is uncomfortable. I have had it 3 times. Yep. I had it again on Sunday, I think, for my 3rd time, because I'm, obviously exposed to a lot of samples. But that is the test that is what we're basing if you are COVID-19 positive or negative. At the drive-thru, you can come through, and we have processed over 3,100 people through the drive-thru of Bermuda so far since the 24th of April. So I'm really proud of the drive-thru team. They are awesome. Yeah, and as far as the lab ourselves, we have done just shy of 3,500 individual tests in this first month. The additional test that I think everyone is excited about and talking about is the antibody test. Now, I briefly touched on that at the press conference on the 6th of May. This is looking at your body's immune response. So if you are exposed to the virus, in this case, your body will try to get rid of it via your immune system. And the first line of defense against that are your antibodies. They are essentially the first ones to the scene that bind to the virus and call the rest and say, hey, come, let's destroy this. This is not of us. And so if you have that in your blood, then it signifies that potentially at some point you've had exposure. The PCR test is a current snapshot, whereas the antibody test can let us know what's happened in the past. And so at this point, as of yesterday evening, we have done just under 1,000 antibody tests in the general public. And so really excited about that. We're trying to understand the prevalence of the virus in the Bermuda community. And so that's the reason why we're doing that testing. At the moment, we are giving both results out. So the PCR test results, people are able to get via email within 24 hours. Most is between 12 to 24 hours. If you're negative, and if you are negative for antibodies, you would also get an email. And last night was the first batch of emails we sent out for the antibody test. If you are positive, however, because recognizing if you have the virus in your system, that's a very important clinical diagnosis. You need to be counseled by a medical professional. And also, if you have antibodies, if you have antibodies and you never had symptoms, that could be, emotionally damaging. Or if you have antibodies and you had close contact with someone that was vulnerable, that could also be emotionally damaging. And so what we do is all the positive results get sent to your GP, and then your GP will call you and let you know and counsel you at the same time. What we have been able to do is have all the GPs have their own portal to the system, and any person that is tagged as being referred to that doctor, they can see on their portal. And so we've streamlined the whole system, and I'm really happy that this week it seems to be that doctors can see in real time what the results are. They can see if we've received a sample in the lab, they can see if it's in progress, and they can see what the result is. So that's what we're doing. And we are going to do the antibody testing up to the end of the weekend. We had our first batch of tests in. And so if anyone wants to make sure they get that, please do book. The link should come up, I think, at the bottom, and I think it also will be posted. So it's bda.gov/covid.res/quest, and it's quest with a W, not a U.com to book a test. Now I know that a lot of bookings are going, but if you do want to still come, you can walk in. We do accommodate walk-ins as well, but bearing in mind that as a walk-in, you may not be offered an antibody test because we are getting a bit more strict.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Dr. Weldon. I really admire how you're able to sort of synthesize all of that complex information into something that really the average person in layman's terms can understand. Some of it still went a little bit over my head and hurt my head a little bit,
yeah.
But I'm sure that the prompts at the bottom of the screen help. Now, Doc, I'm mindful of the time, and I know you need to get some rest before you go back to whatever shift you're doing next. But I do want to.
So this is good.
Okay, good.
There's no samples there, so I have.
Well, I hope this is a little bit therapeutic for you, but
it is actually.
We want to switch over into some rapid fire questions, if you don't mind, in a bit. But before we do that, I do want to get your views on the government response as well, and your current work. But before we do that, just wrapping up from our last sort of topic on age and experience and sort of your credibility and credentials, I want to get some of these live comments up so that we can acknowledge our listeners. Glenda Carlington said, "Age is nothing but a number. Experience, integrity, humility, compassion, care, and giving will prevail. Dr. Weldon, you are appreciated by me." Judith Parsons, one of our repeat viewers, says, "Those who are stuck will think young is inexperienced, but I celebrate young people who are progressive thinkers." Thank you very much, Ms. Parsons. Claire Ann Rayner says, "Ryan and Aaron, these same words can be attributed to you as well." Thank you very much, Ms. Rayner. We appreciate that. We enjoy doing what we do. And I think this is another one of those very good segments, Aaron, to have another young Bermudian up on screen. Dr. Weldon, we appreciate you. And Zena Edwards says, some questions here that are coming in. Carika Weldon, will you be publishing a paper on the science of the Bermuda pandemic?
So yes, that is something that...
Yeah, we want another 48,000 words, Doc.
It won't be 48,000. It can't be that long. Papers have word limits. Theses don't. But so at the moment with the antibody testing, we are in the pilot stage. So everyone that's being tested now, we're actually trying to iron out certain things. We want to make sure we ask the right questions. We want to make sure we get the right sample size. We want to make sure we get a randomized sample. So everyone that's being tested now has contributed to that process. But we will be looking to iron everything out. And this is a secondary goal. Obviously, we are trying to make sure we manage the pandemic and we can open the economy up fully. That's the goal of the government. We want to make sure we get Bermuda back on track, because we and I am very aware that some people have suffered very much economically during this time, and that is not up for debate. And so we want to make sure that everyone can get back to where they can and start to recover. But we are, and I say we in terms of the CMO's office and Bermuda Health Council have joined in as well. And BHB, Ethics Committee, we're all kind of making sure that we can get this right so that we can kind of be a player and a leader in science, because at this rate, we have tested, I think, close to 10% of our population almost in PCR testing. And then antibody, we're just about almost going to reach 2%. And I don't think many other countries have done that. So we do want to publish something, but that is definitely something very much secondary.
And on that note, another question was, what is the targeted number or percentage of Bermudians to get tested for the antibodies?
I think that question the answer is more about the supply of the test. I think that's been said so many times that the procurement of the testing supplies has always been a challenge. And with antibody tests being the newer kind of, exciting one, that's now the one that's harder to get. So we can only go based off of what we can get. But I think with what we are aiming to get, we should be around a sixth of the population.
Okay. And I mean, another thing that you raised, which I wanted to segue into, you mentioned sort of economically, people are struggling and you're eager to get people back to work and Bermuda opened up again. The Premier announced last night that we'll be moving into phase 2 on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Do you think that might be a bit too soon? What are your thoughts on sort of us transitioning and opening Bermuda back up again based on your current expertise?
Or was your advice part? I mean,
yeah. Are you trying to make us get back to work? Huh?
I was waiting for that. So I was not involved in picking a date. So I was found out last night that it would be Thursday. But I am on an advisory panel, which does meet with the Premier once a week. And we do advise from our different expertise what we would suggest in terms of, I think our last meeting was about, the next phase. My advice was that based off of the numbers, and that's all I can go off of, in terms of the PCR testing, those coming to the drive-through who are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have any symptoms and they don't suspect they have it, based off of what we've done so far, we've only had the one out of over 3,000 tests. To me, that was very indicative that we potentially do not have a bunch of spread going around at the moment. And so that's what my advice was, is that from those numbers, it looks like we have managed it. And I think, in my opinion, the 4-week lockdown did a good job of letting that be flushed out. And on the flip side of that is with the antibody test, what we are starting to see is that those who were suspected before, or maybe they knew they might have had close contact, are coming up as having it. And I think, had we done this a month ago, so when I first got here, had we jumped right in and started doing community testing and antibody testing, if it was available at the time, I think we would have seen a very different picture. So I think the 4 weeks actually helped quite a lot, because that was 2 cycles to let the virus go out. So just to stress, I did not tell the Premier open up on May 21st, but my advice was that from what we're seeing in terms of the PCR testing through the drive-through, which is a snapshot of the general population, it was looking very promising.
So, Dr. Weldon, how we know that Oxford has been so gracious enough to give us and allow us your presence under your contract with them. How long is that going to last? Because it appears, and it's very clear to us, that you're very important to Bermuda as we navigate through this crisis. So how long do we have you for?
That's a good question that I do not know the answer to. I came on a one-way ticket to Bermuda, so I do not know how long I'm here for. I think we're just going to play it by ear, and I think due to the different phases, like I can't leave unless there's a plane. So that's indicative of, I guess, how long I'll be here for. But yeah, at this point, my boss has, I keep in contact with him, on a regular, and he knows what I'm doing. And, he said, just let him know. At the moment, they're still in the UK, very much deep into pandemic mode. So it's not like they have moved on and then we're behind and then I need to get back to work and do my research projects that I, have to project manage. But they're also actually deeper into it than we are. So I don't know. That's a good question.
Are there individuals that you work closely with that, for example, let's say post phase 4, we're starting to recover, but it's still important to have the advice of a science advisor and the like. Is there somebody that you could hand over to, or is this something that you believe you could do virtually, for example, once the need for testing has kind of slowed up?
So as far as, I'll go for the three roles I do. So for the testing itself, like I alluded to earlier, I didn't do testing for a while physically. I wasn't actually in the hood working with samples for a while because I was in quarantine. And so all the process up to validating the lab and verifying it and doing all the testing and getting everything, and even my own test to get me out of quarantine was not done by me. I have a very capable team who are able to get that done. And if I don't want to show up one day, if I say, look, I'm not coming for whatever reason, or should I say, if something comes up and I get called to a meeting, or I get called for another emergency, we still have the capacity to do testing. So I'm very proud of that. For the swabbing site, it runs pretty much without me now, because Dr. Amne and Mr. Stephen Tucker from BLDC have that on lock. So if I also
you were needed to set that up, or
I was needed to set up. So actually, in quarantine is when I was instructed that we want to have a drive-through near your lab, make it happen. And I was like, okay. So I, put the idea together. I found the site on Google Maps, and I drew out how I wanted it to go, and I had the vision in my head of what I wanted it to look like, and that was operationalized very much due to Public Works. In fact. The Minister of Public Works and the PS, they gave me the resources to get that happening. And the first day was a bit rocky. There were some things, like some minor details that I didn't really know about at the time. I wasn't aware of because we hadn't done it before. But we quickly got our act together, and we were able to recover that same day. And by the Saturday, we were running very well. And so, yeah, that was, I guess, my vision. I was instructed, make it happen, and we did. And so when there's issues, like, for example, or when it comes to progressing, so for example, we were initially writing everything out, and when we got the papers of the samples in the lab, we would then import them into our system. And I said, look, can we try to have them at the check-in of the drive-through automatically input them into the system? It makes it a lot smoother. And so graciously, due to donations from AF Smiths, they gave us 2 iPads, and now we're able to do that. And so my job is to just make that whole system a lot cleaner, a lot smoother.
I didn't know that you designed the whole, area and the testing side and all that.
Yeah, that was all. And similarly, with the lab, which is, I guess, the one I touched on earlier, is we were given a space in the government central lab at Southside, and the room wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't up to PAHU standards. So I was literally on WhatsApp video chat with the project manager I was assigned to from Public Works, saying, can you put a wall here? Can you put a window there? And we walked through it together. And that was on a Wednesday. I drew a picture. He drew a picture as well, and it matched. So we were on the same page. As of Thursday morning, they started construction, and they finished that on Saturday night. So it took them only 3 days. So but from Wednesday to Sunday is the whole transformation happened, and we were able to start on April 19th.
Okay. I mean, Aaron, I'm glad that you asked that question about whether Carika has to return, because, I mean, it really speaks to sort of you as a young Bermudian. I mean, how many people can do what you do the way that you came back and were able to switch right into that role? So we're definitely grateful to have you. It makes you wonder, what would we have done without you? I
want to also just say as well, because that has been a source of tension, and I want to just address that and no one has ever stated that, like, I came back and now testing is happening, because I must acknowledge, and I do, that the Helix Lab did an awesome job to get us in a position where the pandemic was announced, I think, on March 12th, I believe. And less than a week later, we had on-island testing due to their services. So we do have capable scientists on island who are doing the actual testing. And that's why we were able to do that from the middle of March and be in such a strong position now. But when it comes to my role, it was about expanding the testing, having a second site, a government lab, which there wasn't a government lab that was able to do this testing. And then on the other side was to add that testing drive-through type of scenario at Southside. For the third job as a science advisor, most of that I was already doing remotely when I was in quarantine because I couldn't go anywhere. So that's definitely something I could do remotely. I had never really thought about passing that on. I would probably have to think who I could do that to. But if I was asked, I would find it out and make sure that happens. My thing is, I am not trying to be the one, right? I don't think that makes sense. The job needs to be done. If it can be done more efficiently by someone else, that's how it goes. And I think that for me, I'm learning in this period to delegate more because I'm not used to doing that. I usually just do everything myself, especially the charity. But I'm learning more, like, let others do it, and it makes the job better. So I would be very happy to hand over if that was what was required.
Right. Now, Carika, Dr. Weldon, rather. I'm mindful of the time, but I do see that there are quite a few more questions. If you don't mind staying on, I know Aaron needs to sign off. So thank you very much, Aaron.
Dr. Weldon, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
Thank you for your frank responses. And on behalf of the people of Bermuda and the many that you assist on a daily basis, thank you. When you get off of Ryan, because I don't let him keep you too much longer, but when you get off with him, make sure that you do get some rest, because I know that you're working day in and day out. But thank you again for your time. And Ryan, as you say, I do have to go, but I'm going to, as Dr. Weldon just mentioned, handing off, I'm going to hand it off to you to take it from here.
Yeah, and I'll take a few more questions. So thanks, Aaron. We'll see you again on Thursday.
Thank
All right,
you.
bye for now.
Okay. So Carika, I wanted to stay on with you just a bit longer because we did have a few more questions. So I'm grateful for you giving us, we'll do an extra 5 minutes, I think. And thanks to the members of the public for staying with us. So Zena Edwards says, you mentioned the Bermuda Hospitals Board Ethics Committee. Being ethical in science is key. What sort of ethical concerns were considered?
So when it comes to the antibody test, I think there's a few points to worry about. First of all, is that it's a new test. And at the moment, there has been no one in any country or any body that has said, we have mandated mandatory antibody testing, or we are going to put this as a policy. And so even when it comes from WHO, they're also very cautious, realizing that the accuracy of the test is not yet where we want it to be to only do the antibody test by itself. And so because of that, we had to consider, if we are going to start doing this, not just to, try to see prevalence, people are going to want to know their result. How do we handle that? And so that is why, actually, in fact, when we started on May 9th and the press release went out, it was made clear that those people that were going to take the antibody test were not going to get their results right away. The reason for that delay was because we had to consider these types of scenarios where we would give a result and then that would dramatically emotionally impact on that person. So we wanted to take that week, which was last week, to kind of iron that out. And so, for example, if you have someone who has been isolated, who's vulnerable, and then they have the antibody test and it says they have IgG, which is the longer term immune response, they might automatically think, oh, that means I'm immune, I'm safe. And then if there's some type of gathering, they would go. But then what happens if they are caught, if they catch the virus because someone at that gathering has it, then what? So we had to go through all of these scenarios. And what we really want to make sure is that every single person in Bermuda knows, just because you may have the presence of the antibodies does not make you immune. The science right now does not support that. We just don't know. If you have been exposed once, we're not sure if you can be exposed again. So that was really
what is the value of testing for the antibodies, if you had to put it in simple terms?
The value for on a country level is to know exactly how many people had it. Because remember, for a long time, we had very restricted testing on island, where it was prioritized to if you had symptoms and you were critical, basically. So if you didn't have as many symptoms, but you thought you had it, you weren't tested. But what we're finding now is some of these people are coming up as having the antibody. So actually they did have it. So that would allow us to understand exactly how exposed the island was. But also we're finding as well, the more we do this, that it is seemingly accurate. And the other thing is that we're doing it with the PCR test. So we are not doing just the antibody test, because what if you do have the longer term response? Do you still have it in your system? We don't know yet. And so that's why we're doing them together.
So it's really used to sort of gauge the level of spread throughout the island and how many.
That's the main function. Yeah, exactly. So, but obviously individuals, like I've been tested, obviously, and I was like, it would be really cool to have the antibodies to say I survived, but I don't. So there we go. So it is obviously interesting for people to know, and we're aware of that we cannot ask people to let us test them for the national numbers and not tell them, because they want to know. And so that was where we need to really iron out. And so that is being finalized now. So that's why those who have been told their results, we got a blurb, a approved blurb that goes in the email from the Ministry of Health so that it can be communicated correctly. And we are making sure that we take all of those precautions not to cause emotional harm.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Dr. Weldon. I think we've taken a heap of questions in relation to your testing and the work that you're doing. But as we wrap up, we're getting up for the 2-hour mark. I'll do maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I want to shift a little bit into your personal life and your personal experience, because we've talked a little bit about how you came back to Bermuda to contribute and how that worked out and some of the work you've been doing, the many hats you've been wearing. But we're also mindful that, hey, you still have a life to live. You've been doing night shifts. You've been in 3 different countries in this year alone, and you've gone from hotel to hotel, and you did your 2 weeks quarantine, and then you had a night shift with the lab up at Southside. So you're all over the place, but you do still have a life to live. So, I mean, can you speak a little bit about how your health and well-being has been? I mean, Tanae Alexandria says specifically, what is the likelihood of transmission to yourself, and how does that affect your ability to work? And then with you giving back, how are you dealing in regards to your own health and well-being?
So being a frontline worker, like every other frontline worker in Bermuda who is, doing an awesome job, we assess the risk that by being on the front line, we could contract the virus. There are precautions for that, so we have to wear the appropriate PPE. When I'm in the hood room, which is where we actually have the samples that could be active, fully gowned, fully donned, so that I should not be able to contract the virus. If I was to contract it, like I mentioned earlier, we would still be able to do testing, and it would almost go back to when I was in quarantine, when I was helping just remotely. So I'm not afraid that if I was for whatever reason to contract it, that all testing would stop, because that's been something that I want to make sure doesn't happen, and have been able to do. Like I said, the swabbing site will continue. I can still advise remotely, and the testing lab would still function. But as far as my health and well-being, it was a challenge initially, because I went from doing absolutely nothing on holiday in Nigeria, and then got back to England actually because I flew through Heathrow, which obviously loads of people have flown through. I actually did a 2-week isolation in the UK. And so I was working from home already, and that's when I was actually teaching. The first week was when I was teaching young people in Bermuda or doing experiments, and that was my way of like not being by myself, right? I was going
to ask, how did you cope with that 2 weeks at least of isolation?
Exactly, and I was right, and that for me, I found it was keeping me sane. I know I don't normally teach primary schools, but I really enjoyed that, and again, that was awesome. I miss them. Shout out to everyone that I taught. They were amazing, and just their spunk and their excitement was really awesome. That was the first week. Towards the end of that week is when I got pulled in to help with expanding testing initially to just get more resources. That following week was when I was really more heavily involved, and it was told, okay, you're coming back. Then I came back to 2 more weeks of quarantine. Nicer because it was sunny. Obviously, it was in England. So that was nice. At South P, had the balcony. But again, I decided I was going to teach because it really kept me sane. That second week, I was able to teach again. And it really helped. I have left, and I haven't taught them for a while now. I do miss them. It did keep me grounded, to be very honest. Obviously, I have more interaction with people now, so it's not as bad. But I do realize I need time to just have downtime. And that's why today, in fact, is one of those days. I had tried to do that last week on my birthday, but I had an interview with my goals. And then I got, we were trying to get the emailed out results for the first time done as soon as possible. So I ended up doing that. But yeah, today I said, look, there's no test to be done. Let me take the day off.
So you say you're in good health then, mentally?
Yeah, I think mentally I'm good. I have a very strong support system. And I think I was actually overwhelmed by the public response to that press conference, mainly because it was misunderstood, the question that the reporter was asking. He wasn't asking himself to challenge my qualifications. It had already been asked, so similar to what you've been asking me today, just asking, okay, what do you have to say into response? But a lot of people thought he was questioning, and I wanted to make that clear, and I think I did that last week, but I'll do it again. Myself and Owen have a really good relationship. He's covered all my Bermuda Principles Foundation stuff. So he knows very much about me and we have no issue. But to see the response from the public and how they came to my defense, I was like, what? I'd never imagined that. And that was overwhelming. and encourage.
I think it wasn't so much about the reporter, Doc, but I think it's important to sort of at least consider that maybe that question would not have been asked. Maybe not necessarily from that reporter, but the topic itself may not have been asked in general had you been somebody else, for example, or had different demographics. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I think just the mere fact that that was an issue from the beginning, I think it speaks to something in our community, or at least something unspoken, perhaps, in relation to sort of the value that's been placed on you as a young Black woman and a Bermudian who has gone away and done the qualifications and done the requirements needed to have a particular skill and level of expertise to then come home and be questioned by that, when perhaps it would not have been questioned elsewhere or by a person who didn't fit your current identity characteristics.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. I acknowledge that, and that's not just a challenge for Bermuda. It is a challenge for Bermuda, but it's something I have also had to do with in the UK. So I'm kind of used to it in a sense.
okay.
But I just wanted to make that clear, because there was a real conversation against that reporter, and my father even called into a radio station to clarify, just because we didn't want people. I didn't know he was going to do that. He told me afterwards, but he didn't like the fact that people were kind of coming for Owen. But just wanted to make sure that people understand that, yeah, Bermuda, we do have this issue. And I know for a fact, my last name is English. Dr. Weldon is not a Bermudian name per se. You can't tell my race from that. But had I been a different demographic, as you said, I wouldn't have been questioned. And that is something we need to acknowledge. But in the time being, while we figure out all of that, I'm just happy to do my job.
Well, that's the best response you can give, right? Is to just do the work. But I think that's where other people like myself and Aaron and other people in the community have to step in. Because even though, for example, a question like that was asked, I mean, we have to also have some personal sort of responsibility as individuals in the community and understand sort of the appropriateness in the sense that, you know, we have a premier, we have a government. He wouldn't have just picked somebody up off the street and assigned them to run a testing center, contrary to what some people may believe.
Right.
And I think in some respects, you shouldn't have to answer a question like that, in my personal opinion. So I understand your view. In my opinion, it shouldn't be a question to begin with, because when we give validity to that sort of conversation, it leaves room for, you know, what if you hadn't answered that question as well as you did? That would not negate what you're bringing to the table. So people are entitled to their personal opinions on that. And I understand, you know, you've taken a very humble and noble view on it. But I think it's important that at least the record is made clear. And I think that's what you've done today, certainly if you haven't done it before. You mentioned a little bit about teaching and what keeps you grounded. And I think that's sort of a nice segue into the last question. You've been running the Bermuda Principals Foundation. Can you talk with us? Nicholas Butterfield asked, can you talk a little bit about that? What is your work with the Principals Foundation? You also run a scholarship. You've been teaching students throughout all this. How has that been impacted? What do you do? And what do folks need to understand about the work that you were doing prior to this pandemic?
So I will first of all apologize to all those who have applied, because we have extended the deadline, but it has not been extended on the Bermuda Scholarships website. That will be done as of today. And so what I'm going to do is actually extend the deadline for the scholarship until the end of May. So please spread the word. We'll have an updated graphic on our website and on our Facebook for that. My initial, when I finished my schooling, my initial thought to give back is not a new one. This is not because of COVID-19. This was always my stance. And I just felt that after being given the opportunity from the scholarships and to become Dr. Weldon, and because I didn't have to come back and give back, I just felt I should do. It wasn't like a need. It wasn't in the contract that when you finish, come back to Bermuda. But I felt personally compelled to do so. And so in 2016, which was in May 2016, actually 4 years this month. Yeah. Wow.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So 4 years ago, and actually you had Miss Myra Virgil on at the Bermuda Community Foundation. We started at the Bermuda Community Foundation because I'm a scientist. I don't have a clue really about accounting and all the stuff that goes into, you know, running a charity at the time. So I was advised to go there, and they were very helpful in getting me started. I was there for 3 years. And I started this charity to promote science more in Bermuda, because what I saw from growing up here, I didn't even know that what I do now exists. I didn't know. I thought if I like science, I should go and be a medical doctor. Medical doctors are very much needed, and we you know, I appreciate all of them, and I'm happy to be working with them now. But there's a whole other plethora of careers in science that I just didn't know existed. I stumbled into it because, like I said before, I didn't get into medical school the first time. And so I wanted to make sure that our young people knew about this, that they were exposed to these careers. And so from that year, I think from November 2016, we did our first program, which was bringing students down from the UK who I used to teach. I used to be a lecturer teaching biomedical and medical science. I would bring them down and we would go into the schools and do workshops for middle and high school students on what biomedical science was all about. And so that has been going on. And I also do a conference usually every year. And it's really fulfilling because through that, I have had 2 mentees do small scale PCR-based projects. Mm-hmm. So for them now to see that's how the COVID-19
applied in action.
They're like, wow, like Cameron Young, she was the first one. She did a project, we're looking at a taste receptor and how it kind of links to diabetes. She was collecting cheek swabs and extracting the DNA and doing PCR. That's the exact same thing we're doing now for the testing. And she was doing that as a BHS high school student.
So Doc, do you think that in light of all that's happened with you sort of being on the front pages and being in the highlights in the midst of this pandemic and the use of science, and you know, you're what we think right now to be the first science advisor to the Premier and to the government, has the profile of science been raised in Bermuda? What do you think, or what are you hoping will happen after this pandemic when it comes to science and young Bermudians and the way that we value STEM in Bermuda?
100% through the roof, because at this point, and this is why I keep going, and even though there's been challenges, I keep pushing, because this is a life and death situation now. Mm-hmm. The whole country got put in a corner. So go in the corner right now and stay there and let science get us out. So mm-hmm. I think that the whole pandemic has been a very overwhelming, situation for me, like I said, because I've lost family members, I've lost close friends through this in Bermuda. But then at the same time, I'm not just in a position to be at loss. I'm also able to help and be able to directly impact what happens going forward. I'm not sure what's going to happen after the pandemic, but I think that it's very clear that science needs to be more prevalent in Bermuda. That's clear. Absolutely. I don't know how we do that. I have my own wishes, but the fact that I had to come back and start a molecular diagnostic lab, a government one, because we didn't have one, speaks volumes in and of itself. But now that we have one, there's going to open a lot of opportunity for those who are in science. So we have a professional and qualified medical technologist in the lab who's the lab supervisor, but we also have students doing biomedical science who are lab assistants in the lab right now. And we're not only getting them to help with the testing and they do more the admin side and they do a bit here and there, but they are asking me questions. Why are we doing that? How does this work? What gene are we targeting? What protein does that? And so they're actually learning. We had a chat last night. They were asking me, well, Dr. Weldon, how did you go about getting your PhD? Because they're now thinking about it, right? Our medical technologists, they got accepted into a PhD program as well. So I'm excited because we are not going to ever be in this position again. Yes, I am the one that is for the moment, and I am, as far as I understand, the first science advisor. And someone like me in Bermuda is very rare, but I don't want it to always be like that. It should never be like that again. We should be at a point where we have options. We have an army of people who can step up to the plate.
Well, that's where the representation comes in, right? And I'm sure that that's a gap that you're filling, because when we traditionally look at doctors and scientists, they may not particularly look like you. And so I think you have to recognize the important role that you play, not only with the qualifications and experience and expertise that you're bringing to the table, but just by having your presence in the room and sort of reaching children who may not have otherwise been reached and setting an example for the rest of us. So Doc, we're grateful and we're very thankful and honored to have you on this show today, as well as here in our country, in this island of Bermuda, helping us out with the current COVID-19 pandemic. So, I mean, on that note, we've reached 2 hours now. This is one of our longest shows ever, but we did have a long series of guests today. So we're going to close the community forum out now. If you don't mind staying on with me for the closing, then we'll do that. So, you know, Dr. Weldon, it's been a pleasure to have you. We've had a host of different guests today, but certainly it was a very positive note to end on with you coming and sharing your expertise with us. We had Dr. Myra Virgil from the Bermuda Community Foundation. We had Miss Allison Tolson of the Bank of Bermuda Foundation. We had some nurses come on from Bermuda College, and particularly in the nursing education field. And it was a pleasure to hear from them regarding some of the opportunities out there for young Bermudians or any Bermudian really who wants to get interested in nursing. And so for those who missed that segment, I encourage you to go and rewind and look at the information there on how to get involved. And last but not least, we had you, Dr. Weldon. I think we covered a lot today. It was a very wholesome interview. We talked about your experience as a young Bermudian coming back to assist. We talked about some of the challenges you faced. And then we also talked about the antibody testing. So Miss Patty Woolridge, I encourage you to go back and rewind and listen to that piece where you can hear sort of what Dr. Weldon has been doing as far as at the testing site down at Southside. And finally, we got to talk to you as a real person, Dr. Weldon. I know that we may put people on a pedestal and sort of, you know, look at them like some perfect figure, but I'm glad that Miss Tanae Alexandria asked, how were you doing? Because it's important that you take care of yourself while you manage and wear your 3 different hats. So do you have any final thoughts?
Oh, I have a lot of shout outs I want to make that I think I mentioned at the beginning.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so the swabbing team, who I have to say have done phenomenal. They come sometimes from 8 in the morning because we have to be there to prepare, and they leave at 7. And they're volunteering their time. You know, these are our young people as well. And they are happy to do that. They are happy to give back to their country. So I'm going to list off their names if you don't mind. So we have Nia Daly, Sakara Phillips, Nafisa Robinson, Deja Simons, Toya Anderson, Deja Keynes, Sandaje Riley, Tala Sumner, Taj Cox, Kaya Wilkes, Kristen Steed, Jade Robinson, Elizabeth Davis, and we have Dr. Keandra Simons, who is on the back end now, but she's doing an awesome job. And we also have great staff who help us out every day. So Dr. Amne Osran, as I mentioned, Mr. Stephen Tucker, we have Dalvina Keynes, we have Dean Paris, who runs, as you may know, the warehouse. So they've been working awesome to make sure we have all our PPE. And we have Mr. Nathan Darrell and Mr. Booth as well. So I just want to shout them out and thank the whole team for what they do. And also wanted to say to the people of Bermuda, let's keep safe. Do your physical distancing. Let's keep to the rules, because I do not want us to go back into the corner. Let's keep going so that we can progress through this pandemic and be the leader really in the world, and say that we fought this off and we've been able to get our economy back on track.
Thanks, Doc. I'm smiling because a lot of those names you mentioned, those are people that I recognize that I went to school with. I'm 23, you 30. A lot of those names are people that I went to school with and graduated with from high school. And so it was heartwarming to hear you. These are people on the front lines, young Bermudians, educated, degrees, qualified people coming back to assist this island, this country in the midst of a global crisis. So if there's anything to our listening public, if there's anything you take from this interview, aside from the antibody testing and the specifics and the different programs out there, never again should we be in a position where we are questioning the expertise and the credentials of our young Bermudians. I think for the most part, the response has been supportive. And those people who questioned you have been rightly criticized. Of course, we have our checks and balances, but never again, Bermuda, should we be in a position where our young Bermudians are eager to come back home and contribute their expertise, more qualified than most, because I can't think of many people who can do what you do, Doc. There may be 1 or 2 out there, but ultimately, never again should we be in a position like that. So let's continue to uplift our young people, our young Bermudians, and all of the people out there who are contributing in the midst of this current pandemic, and those who have contributed long before it, because there have been people out there who may have felt unappreciated beforehand. And so we appreciate you, we value your work, and we're grateful that you took the time out today to talk with us. So we had a few comments that I'd just like to recognize as we close out. Glenda Carlington says, thank you all for your contribution to this program. Excellent information. Bless you, Dr. Weldon, Aaron, and Ryan. And so I'll pass that on to Aaron, Ms. Carlington, who had to leave a bit early because this is one of our longest series. We're on 2 hours and 15 minutes. We went a bit over time, so he had to go. But thanks, Doc, for staying around to close out with me. And then Maria Madeira says, thank you, Ryan and Aaron. So thank you, Maria, and thank you. We wouldn't be able to have a community forum without the community. So we're grateful to our guests, our community, and of course to Burnus for providing us with this platform. So thanks again to everyone. Shares Wolf, you asked earlier if we could have the premier on, and just as a follow-up for our next series on Thursday, we will be having the premier on live. So for those of you who are still with us this afternoon, stay tuned for Thursday. We will have Premier David Brett, the Honorable David Brett, JPMP, Premier of Bermuda, on this series with Aaron and I on Thursday. So stay tuned. We've had some really great guests. This has been another great session. Thank you very much. So thanks to our essential workers. Again, we'd like to send our condolences to the families of the 9 persons who've been affected by COVID-19, who've passed away. We send our sympathies to those who are still battling with it, and those out there in the community who are dealing with the knockoff effects of this current crisis. So thanks again. Thanks for engaging with us. Thank you, Dr. Weldon. And